All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. So, here at Game and Compute, this podcast talks a lot about side hustles, finance, credit cards, a little bit about crypto, just things that you can do on your own to look at money. It's a little bit educational. It's not financial advice by any means, and it's for entertainment purposes, but it is realistically things that you can apply, things that I've researched out that others have been applying, things that I would like to try that some I have not tried. Many of the things I talk about are things that I have tried, and I'll usually tell you when I specifically have literally dug in and tried some of the things that I talk about on this channel. And, today, this episode is going to cover how a podcast can, potentially increase engagement of an audience, or at least if they're not increasing it themselves, they can, know what it looks like for some people to see successful results. Now, successful results might not be the same for every person. For myself, if I made $15 a day, that might be considered successful. If my mom was recording and she made $3 a day, she might find that successful. Someone who's making $30 a month might consider that successful, and they might consider that, fine. And they might not even be there for the money. They might be there just because they like the craft and it's creative and they enjoy it and they just want a podcast. And hey, if $30 come out every month, then so be it. It couldn't hurt to make some change here and there for doing something that usually doesn't cost you any money, right? It costs you time, maybe some effort, maybe some researching. People say time is money, but realistically, we pay for electricity to charge our devices. We pay for the Wi-Fi, to be able to upload and download and all sorts of things. So there's some cost involved, but usually if you have Wi-Fi, it's not specifically only because you want a podcast, right? That's not the only thing you're usually going to be using it for. So let's take a look at what some podcast channels have talked about as their specific results that they've noticed. So, in some podcasts, say if they've been around maybe about 4 years, and maybe the first couple years or so, they were kind of like not really having a strategy, posting here and there, not really doing too much that made a lot of, structured sense. Maybe they didn't even care about that and they didn't really have strategies, but also it wasn't bothering them. And then maybe they get to a point where they're like, I want audience engagement. I'm at a point where that's something that's important to me and this craft, instead of only, just posting and having fun posting. I have another goal that I'm adding. And so to add something like, looking at the audience, looking at the people who are engaging with your content, Anchor.fm does give you a lot of statistics. I'll be honest that I don't really know Spotify too well as far as the stats information, and Apple gives you stats as well. So I can tell you one challenge that I have not come across an answer to, and maybe there's an easy solution, but I don't know what it is. So one thing that I'm trying to find out, even though I haven't looked super, super deeply on this, but I have looked multiple times, because Anchor sends your podcast to Apple and Spotify and other, other platforms, you don't technically have like a login account with an open podcast on, say, Apple, right? So for myself, for example, I have, multiple podcasts. So if I'm trying to record multiple podcasts, I can't have them all linked to my iPhone, Apple Podcasts, because it uses my Apple information, my Apple login information to be able to be in that app and recording and getting the statistics. So when you go from Anchor, and Anchor is sending your podcast to Apple, you can only really have the one account connected to a podcast. If you have multiple podcasts, you can't connect every single account, because then you need different Apple IDs. At least to my knowledge, that's what it's looking like as far as what I've recognized. I mean, maybe you can make more, and maybe it's a simple thing and I just haven't figured that out, because I am a little bit jumbled, as you guys know, and sometimes it takes a lot more researching for me to find what I need to be able to do what I'm trying to do. So anyways, if you look at some podcasts, right? For example, if the majority were coming from Spotify, for example, over 60% from Spotify, and the audience was an estimated 5,000 in general that was showing up on Anchor, right? Anchor.fm. And if it doesn't seem to matter how many subscribers a person really has, if they have this much engagement, at least from what it seems. Now, am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know. Like I mentioned often, I can't really tell 100% like what the algorithms are seeing and everything. I'm just kind of going by compiled data. And so that this is kind of what it seems like, is that you can have about 200 to 300 subscribers on Anchor with an audience that shows about 5,000 people viewing your content or listening to your content. And then that would have, depending on your ads, when you're putting 2 ads in, maybe one at the start or one in the middle and one at the end, for a video that's about 15 minutes long, you could get $8 per 32,000 plays in some cases. How common is this? I don't know. But it is possible. I mean, I've seen people's dashboards where that's what their statistics were kind of looking like. And, there are different factors that contribute. I've talked before about like the length of episode times, the length of times of posting, being approximately every day. So, for example, some people just don't post weekends and they post once a day, every weekday, with an episode about 10 to 16 minutes long, again, depending on the type of content. If the 10 to 16 minutes would not be valuable, you might need to figure out what that number looks like. You can play around with the numbers, see what comes up, play around for a few months. The issue is that's hard, is that it can be a slow game, right? So if you try something for a week, it may not work. If you try something for 4 months, it might start to yield results. But sometimes people don't want to wait 4 months for something. If they're not seeing results, it's like, okay, like 4 months is too long, to wait until it's like, okay, you've hit some consistency mark that the algorithm likes and now it's paying you. I mean, it's just, I don't know. These are complex things, but so let me see. And in addition, a person having, in Spotify, like with the same type of example, in Spotify having 62 to 63,000 subscribers for like about 450 episodes. Sometimes people are making about $400 a week. And so I'm almost like I've been hesitating about putting out these tidbits recordings, because it's like I don't want people to be like, oh, I tried this for 4 months and it didn't work, because it's not me that's giving the money. Like, it's just, I've noticed that people's dashboards show these things. When you go through and you look at the dashboards of different content creators, the issue is only recently has YouTube started showing some of the Anchor.fm or Anchor podcaster, content, as far as like them posting their dashboards about their content. A lot of us have been on here for years, and for the longest time, the only thing you really saw on YouTube were a couple ads that showed up that were showing you basically how to use Anchor.fm, how to sign on to it, how to subscribe and start podcasting. It didn't really show you too much about any monetary information, and that's very recent content that I've come across in the last maybe year and a half. Up until that point, there wasn't really a whole lot going on that was visible anyways. And so it's hard to really say, because there's not a whole heap of content out there. And then again, as we know, algorithms, they're subject to change. And so, they're adding more and more platforms all the time on, Anchor is. And so we don't know what's going to happen when they start pushing different platforms and pushing different features within those platforms. They might do away with some other stuff, and, people might gravitate, audiences might start gravitating towards Spotify videos or something like that, because it's novel, and, things might start shifting in other directions. You never really know. I mean, TikTok became a thing, right? TikTok wasn't always around, but it's now like even integrated into like Instagram and YouTube, and, it's everywhere. And, the cool thing about tech is that it changes as we go. But if you're trying to like solidify a method and a strategy for making income, it's really hard, because podcasting is developing. It's a new form of content, not new, but it's becoming more popular. It's newly popular. I've noticed since the Rona, it seems like everybody wanted a podcast, and that's fine. I'm not saying like there's anything wrong with it, but I think it became a very entertaining and helpful source of media when people were at home by themselves, more isolated than probably ever before. People wanted to be listening to other people talking about stuff that they liked, because they weren't listening to other people talking about stuff. And when you're on television, when you're watching television, you don't really have the choice of what to search to watch. When you're on YouTube, usually you're visually like looking at it, viewing it. Sometimes you want your eyes to be free. And so when your eyes are free, you can listen, and you can a little bit multitask, or even close your eyes. Or, if you're driving and listening to a podcast, please God, don't close your eyes. But if you're just lounging around and just resting, you don't have to be glued to a screen visually to look at it and see. And even podcasts, when I listen to them on YouTube, because it's possible to just listen, you don't have to look at it. If it's literally not the kind of podcast where people are actually doing something and they're just recording themselves visually and auditorily as they're making an audio recording at their table in front of microphones, or on their couch, or on their lawn chairs, or whatever they're doing, It's not like you're watching somebody give you a tutorial of how to do something where you have to watch how they took apart this part and where they bought this other piece and all this kind of stuff. Like, you don't have to see it. You can just listen. And so the money part of it is really complex, and people don't really talk about it much in detail too. And when they do, it's usually a long podcast of people talking about how to podcast, and it's so much information, but a lot of times the details aren't there. And so it helps to kind of have a framework to go by, but also the framework doesn't seem to be like 100% per podcast. There's a lot of factors that also come into play, and pretty much most of the factors I'm talking about, you're going to hear them in these podcasting tidbits episodes of like methods that people can potentially try to use. If you do, I hope that they work for you. Good luck with it all, and thanks for listening.